My name's Gary Fowler, and it's great to be here one more time. And I'm broadcasting today back in Silicon Valley. It is so good to be here. Just love this place. I'm looking at the mountains and this incredible innovation hub that dramatically changes the world. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've done 17 companies, been involved in 2 unicorns, Click Software and Eva.ai. Love artificial intelligence and quantum computing. I'm the CEO, president, and co-founder of GSD Get Shit Done's Venture Studios, a premier AI and quantum venture studio. And it's with great pleasure as we continue our series on Africa that I introduce Benjamin Dada. Benjamin's a serial entrepreneur, marketing, sales, business development, has a robust background, really working with around the continent, helping to bring African technology out and the opportunities to address the African environment in. And it's with great pleasure that I introduce Benjamin. Benjamin, how you doing? And Benjamin's talking. He was so busy today, he didn't have a chance to go back to the office. So this
Yes,
is the
yes,
first. I
yes.
feel like carpool karaoke here. I'm waiting for you to
That's
start
okay.
singing a song or something. It's great, but it's great to have you, Benjamin.
Thank you for having me, Gary. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit. What's going on in Africa in the tech scene today?
Okay. So I think generally, right, there's been an influx of venture capital funding. There's been an influx of investment. I think what changes around slightly is the percentage that goes to the top countries, right? So some of the top countries are Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Egypt, and South Africa, right? So out of the investment that comes into the continent, at least one third of it goes into fintech startups, right? So if you just even do like a quick scan of maybe TechCrunch, if there are 10 stories, you see 4 articles written about a fintech that just raised money. And every year we see the money, the value keeps increasing, right? So before you look at a pre-seed, and a pre-seed was probably $100,000 or less. But now people are doing pre-seeds of $500,000, which signals a lot more interest, which signals a lot more trust and belief that the next tech unicorn can be built from Africa. The good news is that we had, I think, what would be like our first homegrown acquisition by an American company in Paystack. So Stripe, first of all, invested in their Series A, and then they acquired Paystack. And then next, we had Flutterwave, one of the companies in the league of Paystack, started the same period about 5, 6 years ago. They recently hit unicorn status by virtue of the amount of money they had raised. So there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of enthusiasm on the continent. More people, young people, are considering tech as a new career path. So we've gone from medicine, law, engineering to programming, design, data science, right? And this is because of the successes we've seen across board for both the entrepreneurs and even the startups themselves. Yeah.
No, it's great. I mean, I know my partner was down in Lagos recently, and it's a vibrant community. Most people don't realize there are 206 million people just in Nigeria. I mean, it's a vibrant community with incredible entrepreneurs trying to make
Yeah.
a dent in the universe. So, what's going on? I see that there's a lot of artificial intelligence happening in Nigeria specifically, and also fintech. Why is that?
So I would say artificial intelligence is being plugged into other industries, right? So I'll give an example. For fintech, you use artificial intelligence for, let's say, for detection, right? You use artificial intelligence for even to improve your credit rating engine, right? You use artificial intelligence for um, any other thing that can just probably improve efficiency across board. What we are yet to see though is, would I say, really high tech artificial intelligence or maybe robots or things that are more how do I put it, where the front facing operation is the AI as opposed to just the back end operation of optimizing services, if you get what I'm trying to describe to you, right? So what we've seen so far is just AI making processes smoother. We're yet to see an AI led solution or product if you get what I mean. Why are we seeing a lot more fintechs coming up in the country? I think it's a chicken and egg problem, right? As more investors begin to back more fintech startups, then we have more fintech startups coming out, right? And then that cycle goes on. But also the good thing is because the fintech ecosystem is broad, people are taking their positions in places like infrastructure, right? So you have an API fintech providing infrastructure, and then another personal finance management app, right, is being built on top of that API fintech's infrastructure. So if that API fintech hasn't done well, hasn't come to life, you wouldn't be seeing this new personal finance application, right? And personal finance, for instance, is something I've always been aware about for like 5 years. But until we started seeing the likes of Okra, Mono, Stitch, gaining traction, figuring out a way to innovate around the banks, we didn't start seeing personal finance applications like Inflow, GetStream come out of Africa. So we're having that cycle of, as more investment goes into financial technology, more infrastructure gets built, and then more startups are then encouraged to, come to life.
Got it. And what's happening in the rest of the continent? So I know Nigeria is really it's an amazing place with all the artificial intelligence and incredible solutions. But what's happening in places like Kenya and other parts of Africa right now? Where do you see the activity, Benjamin?
That's a good question. I'm currently running a show that has taken me across, Africa. So I've been to Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, and now I'm in South Africa. Actually, I was in an outro, and that's why I couldn't rush back to the hotel. But what I've seen is Ghana, for instance, is the closest to Lagos in terms of culture, in terms of you know, spirit, attitude, and in fact, the rate of infrastructure development, right? Kenya, of course, as everybody knows, is the home of mobile money. And in fact, I spoke to Bitenga Ndemo, who was, in the government when M-Pesa was about coming to life, right? So the places like Kenya are already thinking deeply about cryptocurrency, while places with less penetration of either internet or mobile are still trying to catch up, right? But I think in places like South Africa, we know, for instance, in the banking space, the top five banks own like 98% coverage. So fintechs are having to figure out what would be the unique offering, right, to capture some of that market. So we have Time in South Africa, we have Discovery, everybody doing things slightly different to try and gain adoption, right? So Ghana mobile money is prevalent, Kenya mobile money is prevalent. Rwanda in particular has one of the strongest and most encouraging government policies or government positioning to attract more digital innovation. So you see the likes of Mr. Easy, who is a musician and music entrepreneur, going to Rwanda to say he wants to do business there. You see the likes of CC Hub, which started in West Africa, expanding to Rwanda, partnering with the government, to bring more, to incubate startups and do a lot of research on the continent out of Rwanda. So Rwanda is encouraging. The government is very welcoming. The institutions that have been put in place are doing their job. But I think they're also at an advantage because the size of their population is not as large as in Nigeria, for instance, right? So if you do any IT project that brings 1 million smartphones to the country, you would have reached, let's say, about 10% of the entire population. But if you bring 1 million smartphones to Nigeria, you're not scratching 0.01%. So it's easier for a country like Rwanda to get ahead than a country that has a larger population size like Nigeria. But overall, I like the fact that people are seeing great examples in startups from the continent becoming unicorns, and more people are inspired to do the same.
No, that's great. And what about, so if somebody, we have listeners from all over the world, how do they come into the market? I mean, you're dealing with so many different countries. How do you come out and say, listen, this is a Africa continent strategy? How would you do that? I mean, because you're dealing with Rwanda, Zambia, Ghana. I mean, how do you do that?
So I think the biggest shock you'd face is all the markets aren't the same. For time, people in the West have thought of Africa as a single country, which is false. And I'm glad more people are realizing that now. But each market has its own unique regulatory landscape. Granted, a few things are similar. So I'll give an example. If you want to operate in any of the markets, you probably for fintech, you probably need a payment systems provider license. Now in Nigeria, that's probably called a PSSP. In Ghana, it's called a PSP. In South Africa, it's called a PSP. Now that is similar across board. However, when you look at the demography, right, you look at the access, you look at the literacy, internet penetration, and then government policies across these markets, they are very different. So if you want to do anything around market expansion, you need to either get someone on the ground to help you do some work to figure out, for instance, if you're trying to integrate as an API fintech, you need someone to help you open up test accounts, because it might be harder for you to go get the required ID or documentation, so you need to work with the locals on ground to be able to foster your market expansion. That's the first thing. The second thing also is, be clear on your market expansion strategy. So what determines the first country you go to, and then if you've sort of created a playbook, you can then try to apply that playbook across board. But realize that your playbook is not something you can just pick and drop. There needs to be some modification. There needs to be some real hands-on or presence on the ground to help you quickly navigate some things. There are some things that are out of your control though, like licensing, right? There is no accurate timeline for you to get a license, right? It usually depends on a lot of factors. What we can say, for instance, if you wanted to get a mobile money license in a country like Ghana, now that they've given out the first EMI license to ZPay, I think the government would have been able to solidify policies around issuing mobile money licenses, right? So maybe you wouldn't take as long as ZPay took to get their license, but you will still spend some time, going back and forth with the regulators, looking for your shareholders fund to keep in place, etc. So bottom line is, understand the market, understand your market expansion strategy. As much as possible, find locals to work with, and also make a trip down to see things for yourself. And then we'll see how things go from there.
No, that's great. And so if you look at the countries, which country would be the easiest? Let's say you're from the West. What country would you go to first, and to get your feet wet, if you will, before you try some of the other ones?
Yeah, I feel like I already subtly answered that question. The only drawback in that is the population size doesn't allow for too much scale.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, you were saying that sounds like Ghana's really open, but you got to go to the population. So if you took two things, one is the size of the population, and two, the ease of market entry, which country would be would you say is number one to get started with?
Hard choice. In terms of market entry, I think Rwanda is probably the easiest. It also depends on the industry in which you're trying to get into, because some industries are more developed than other markets, right? But Rwanda, because of their government policies, the open arms, might be the best to get started with. But like I said, there are probably just 12 million people in Rwanda, and you can start from Rwanda, but you need to be quickly thinking about expanding to a place like Kenya, Africa, Nigeria, right? Nigeria is still very attractive, because of the mere fact that even though there are 200 so-called people in the country, assuming only 50% have access to internet and maybe 20% have access to smartphones, there are still more than the total population of Rwanda. So Nigeria always looks very attractive, and is still very attractive to many people because being niche, right? So for instance, if you're a Twitter, you can get 7 million followers or 7 million users in Nigeria, right? And that's just a little bit of the population. But to get 7 million Twitter users in Rwanda, that's like the whole country knows about you. That's like the whole country is using your product. So at the end of the day, many people are having to balance out total addressable market, right? They have to carve out what their total addressable market is, and then decide, is this something I'm willing to spend money, go deep into? So Opay, for instance, they launched in Nigeria. They've pumped in a lot of money. They started using, ride hailing to sort of generate fintech of financial transactions. When the government came down on ride hailing, they just moved squarely into financial services, right? And now they're still doing very well. So at the end of the day, you just need to balance, how much capital, how much time have I got, and what's my long-term strategy, right? So if you're willing to, play in a market for very long, feel free to come to a more troubled market like Nigeria. But if you're looking to just test how Africa or the reception might be, go to Rwanda. Many countries are also creating something called a sandbox. So before you then invest too much money into getting a license, they allow you develop your solution, but in a controlled environment, which is called a sandbox. But generally speaking, Rwanda and Nigeria are my top picks.
I got it. And so, you're providing all kinds of different services. Tell us a little bit about your company and the kind of things that you're doing to be able to really help those companies expand in Africa and beyond.
Okay, that's an interesting thing. I think I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I started working in the startup space about 6 years ago, and the first time I started working was, with Andela, right? Andela was like a tech, talent incubator, training people and placing them with remote jobs, right? But then on the side, I was a student, right, gaining a formal education in information technology. So while I was going through the practical of interning at a startup, I was getting the theoretical knowledge from, being a postgrad in Lancaster University and all of that. Now, what I have done is to create a sort of media company, right? We focus more on content creation, and then we also help out with some market entry, market research work, right? So if someone wanted to introduce its product or its solution to a very youthful Nigerian audience, we can help you create that content, publish on our platforms, but also reach out to some of the other media publications on the continent, right? So coincidentally, the name of my media platform is my name, so benjamindada.com. So if you were looking for tech news, startup innovation from Africa, you go to benjamindada.com, you see a lot about innovation, you see a lot about funding news, you see a lot about what people are doing, even the talents themselves and what they are doing. We started a new series called Under the Hoodie, which is a play on the fact that tech talent like to wear hoodie. And we wanted to meet these tech talents beyond just meeting their CEOs or the startup founders, right? So what we do basically is we help people in market entry, but we also help them get the word out.
Oh, that's great. And what about what's going on with North Africa, Egypt, Libya? I mean, how integrated is North Africa with the rest of the continent, Benjamin?
So North Africa is sort of unique. In fact, we don't classify it under sub-Saharan Africa, right? So I personally don't even have too much visibility into what's going on. I'll probably just rely on the people that are providing, coverage for North Africa. I think there's MENA, MENA, MENA Bytes, right? He's providing coverage for North Africa. Egypt is very lucrative. We've seen a lot of investments for startups within that space. But generally speaking, I don't really know much about North Africa. Perhaps if my show takes me to North Africa, I'll be able to meet the people there, ask questions, and be able to give you more precise answers. Yeah.
No, it's just interesting. It's such a big continent. I mean, most people don't realize there are 1.3 billion people on the continent. I mean, there's a lot, and talk about explosive population growth and great opportunities. I know when we were recently down in Nigeria, we were astounded by the amount of talent that's there. And so, having a few years ago, I went to Russia, and I remember people said, "Oh, why are you going to Russia?" etc. But I mean, the talent pool there, Ukraine, Belarus, Eastern Europe was incredible. But we're seeing the same kind of things in Africa, and it's an incredible, beautiful opportunity. So we're really excited about it. So what's your forecast? What's going to happen over the next 5 years, Benjamin, on the African continent?
So that's an interesting question. I had a theory that I've forgotten precisely what I had in mind before. But what I'm going to say is within the next decade, we would see a lot more unicorns from Africa. Generally speaking, it's hard for African startups to be measured by the same global standard, especially when you think about the currency difference. $1 is like $500 on the $1 is 500 naira on the black market. So we would see more unicorns come out of Africa, and these unicorns will not just be African founders who are bred and brought abroad, for people like Shola Akinlade of Paystack that grew up in Nigeria, grew up with the realities, with the problems and challenges, right? So that's one thing we would see. And the second thing is we would see the youthful population of Africa, make strong headway either by getting into big techs or by creating their own startups, right? And creating more employment for the rest of the youth on the continent, right? Generally speaking, we have a lot of youths in Africa now are working remotely for startups. And, I think the likes of Andela actually did a lot of good in shining the spotlight on African talent, because many people always just hire sales, marketing, operations in Africa and then go hire engineering elsewhere. But I think over the next 5 to 10 years, there'll be a lot more thought and tech leadership coming from African talent. I think a third thing would be we will have an increase in African founders investing in other African companies, right?
No,
So there
that's
have been
great.
a lot of so there have been a lot of, because as their own worth goes up from maybe their own company. So for instance, if you were a GB who is like the CEO of Flutterwave, right? Your personal worth has gone up as the company continues to grow, and then you then have some money to invest in other founders. So we would see a lot more of that as more African founders become wealthy, and that would also improve the quality of investment advice, because this is from someone that has been in your shoes and who is actually giving you capital and access to markets. A fourth thing might be, I think at some point fintech will begin to consolidate. So we have a lot of people doing similar things across markets. Maybe winners will begin to emerge. People will begin to merge, right? And then we'll probably have a few winners either win within their country or win across Africa. There's a bank in that started in Nigeria that is doing a lot of Pan-African consolidation. So Access Bank, right? They first started by buying up a tier 2 bank in Nigeria. Now they've acquired Go Bank in South Africa. They did something in Kenya as well. So while that bank probably had deep pockets, we will begin to see that also for fintechs and startups in the ecosystem. I think I'll keep it at that for now. And as more things come to my head, I'll probably share with you.
No, I think it's incredible, actually, the kind of things that have happened and the amazing steps forward, and it's incredible. What about the companies, Benjamin? We say about going global, using Silicon Valley as a port to the rest of the world, and I'm starting to see African startups. I did right before the pandemic. Now using it as a port. What's going on? What's the view of Silicon Valley in Africa?
So I think the biggest representation of Silicon Valley to Africa and African startups is YC, right? YC increased their uptake, and we've seen a lot of African startups get into this, YC batches, either for winter or for summer. So there is a lot of aspiration, right? People think, they've made it when they get into YC. Of course, YC has a very strict and very small acceptance rate. So if you get into a very competitive program like YC, you feel like you're doing something great. So from a Silicon Valley point of view, YC has sort of been like a model. But in terms of company culture, startup culture, we're still looking at the likes of Google, who started this journey, over a decade ago. Sometimes we're even confused whether to call them a startup or not. But, in terms of the flexible policy, in terms of the perks, and in terms of the future of workplace, how it looks, how it feels, going away from, siloed work desk to more play work environment, we're seeing a lot of we're imbibing a lot of that culture from Silicon Valley. But also a good thing is we're having architectural firms from Africa that are actually now creating these environments. So I'll give you an example. We have the likes of Deep Designs. They created a very nice piece for Softcom. We're having the likes of Space Finish, who created Andela's office. So African companies who are into architecture are already creating these very futuristic, these very encouraging and welcoming workplaces. But the question is whether we're ever going to return to work, right? Whether we'll just keep staying at home or using remote culture. But I think generally, Silicon Valley is the goal. The market there is more mature. A lot of people still look up to Silicon Valley. Of course, there are some things that we see in Silicon Valley that we duplicate because, it hasn't been done here. And, there's no crime copying, right? Just make sure when you copy, you're copying with the right nuance. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. In fact, Today's the first day that Silicon Valley opens up. This is actually the day where the masks come down. This is a great day in Silicon Valley, and I'm proud to be here. I've been doing startups for 30 years, from conception to IPO. So I've seen a lot. A lot of them come from other parts of the world. I'm really astounded by the incredible progress that Africa's made and the kind of things that you're doing, Benjamin, and your team. And, we were pleasantly surprised during a recent visit to Nigeria. We look forward to supporting the African continent. My grandmother is actually African, North African. So we've got some roots there ourselves, and we want to make this world a better place. And it's people like you and your team, people like Flutterwave that are out there that are really bringing the attention. And now you're hearing a lot of rumblings about investing in Africa. So congratulations. Any final thoughts? And then how do people get a hold of you, Benjamin?
Yeah, final thoughts would be, about talent emigration. I touched on it lightly, but it's a big deal, right? Companies in Africa are struggling to recruit for open positions, right? Because the likes of Google, the likes of Stripe, the likes of other companies in Germany, Europe, right, are splashing more money, greater perks. It's hard to compete, right? And many people are looking to, remote jobs because access to a more diversified workplace, access to greater perks, standard of living. So we're seeing a lot of people start out working for companies remotely, and then they eventually they relocate to these countries. Sometimes it feels unnoticeable because Nigeria is a lot of people, right? But I know a lot of my friends personally who used to work at local tech companies, now working for remote tech companies, and then HR, everybody is just screaming, what do we do to survive, right? So I think that's something we really need to think about. People have argued whether it's brain drain, it's not brain drain, or whether it's good for the ecosystem, because these people who leave tend to come back and develop the ecosystem. But I mean, I think that's something to watch. So the African techie's dream is to get a remote role. To get a hold of me, I'm on Twitter at dadaben_. Right. I don't know if anybody can display that, but yes,
You're on
that's
LinkedIn. You've got a LinkedIn profile, so
yes,
reach
yes,
out
yes.
to Benjamin. He's got a lot of ideas, a lot of connections. Really good guy. He can help you a lot. I want to thank everybody for joining me one more time for GSD Presents Silicon Valley AI and Tech from Silicon Valley. So thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and good luck. Appreciate it. We will see you again on Thursday. Stay tuned. Bye for now, everybody. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.